Hi everyone, my name is Alvin Morales. I'm a Senior Support Escalation Engineer for the System Center team here at Microsoft, and today we're going to be talking about VMM Services Overview. The intent of this video is to just introduce what service templates are, specifically we will cover RTM and SP1, but we just want to see, introduce what it is, what are some of the features, what things you can do, how to update. So we'll go ahead and move along. So we'll have an intro, basically just saying what we want about the service templates. It's an overview, why we're going to use service templates. We'll cover a little bit of the service lifecycle overview, service creation, and service updates, and we'll have a few demos in the middle there to kind of cover these topics. So let's go through lifecycle overview. So basically, a service template is a group of machines. So we start with a template, and basically a template is kind of has all the components, or it's the building block for services. In previous releases of VMM, the only thing you can deploy and really create is a template, and that allowed you to kind of customize what you wanted to provide to your users. But in VMM 2012 RTM and SP1, it evolved to creating services, and services is basically a group of machines working together to provide you with providing a service. So think of in terms of having a VM that has a IIS server, and maybe another VM that has a middle tier, and then a SQL server in the back end. All those three VMs working together become a service in VMM. So the advantage is that each machine can become a tier, and you can service each one of them. You can add more machines, do scale outs, that type of thing, and we'll cover this in more detail, and we'll go through the demos. So we evolved in 2012 to something called an instance. Basically, it's the service. So it's a group of machines working together, as we mentioned. The things that we can deploy using VMM 2012 and SP1 are the web applications, web deploys, virtual applications, meaning server at V, and SQL DAG packs. These are the three supported applications that we deploy. That doesn't mean you can't do deploy anything else. It just means that you can have, these are the packages that we recognize. Now you can have scripts in your service templates that will install an application, or install whatever, run a script to install a SharePoint server, or an AppV server, a management server, for example. But we've done that internally as well. So this is the terminology that we need to get used to when we're doing service templates. So why use services? I mean, the idea is that you can have you'll see this service as a single unit, and you'll have the tiers that I mentioned before. So this all becomes one component, one object within VMM. You have scale out based on demand. So if you have that example that I gave you, where you have a web server, a middle tier, and a SQL server, let's assume that you have deployed this application to 50 users. Now you need another 50 that you need to deploy, give access to this application. Your web server is kind of feeling the hit of the performance. You can do a scale out, and on that specific IIS server, and what's going to happen is you're going to create a second VM with all the configuration to be able to handle that load. So it gives you that versatility, the way of moving out and extending your service or your environment. If you wanted to do this previously, you probably have to deploy a template and run some have some sort of scripts and unattended XMLs, and run once that you wanted to enable roles and have all these things going on to be able to get to the same functionality. It also gives you the ability to manage fewer OS images. So you have one, and then you can customize it. So that's a very good advantage of why using services. Other things, I mean, don't think of services as having to deploy an application. You can even deploy a VM, a single VM, in a service template. But if you want that particular, you don't want to run scripts that enable roles. To give you an example, then you will use a service template to deploy with a single VM that you can enable specific roles and features, and that will save you tons of times in PowerShell scripts or in different type of scripts to be able to enable those roles. So basically how a service template starts is by you create a template, basically a VM template, and there are other components within the template. You have smaller building blocks like a hardware profile, um, a OL operating system profile, an application profile, a SQL profile, and what these do is that you can use these smaller components that are from a template and assign them to cloud users and just allow them to create their own little template from VMs. But those are the base for creating a template. Then once you have a template created, you're gonna go ahead and select that template, drag and drop it into a canvas, and behind the scenes, basically what we're doing is making a copy of that setting in the canvas, and then any customization you do within that new VM in the canvas is basically a new template that's being used and tied into the service template. So you can customize it there, and it won't modify your initial template that you created. Once you have that the way you want it to be, with all the customization that the roles and features, applications, scripts that you want, then you go ahead and deploy the services. And well, the process basically is going to transfer the VHD to the host. In the deploy phase, you can either deploy to a cloud or host. It will transfer the VHD and do the customization within it. Then part of the lifecycle will be, if once it's deployed, you can update the template like we mentioned before. If you want to add a machine, if you want to update the application, now the first application you deploy is V1. Now you make changes. Now you want to update the service to have V2. You can just create a copy of the service template, apply it, and it's serviced, and you're done. I mean, you're completely back in shape with the new version. So this is kind of a simplistic way of seeing the life cycle. Again, this is mentioning that the template is a starting point. You author the template in the new service designer. You define the machines, the tiers, hardware, the logical networks, logical networks or VM networks in SP1 that you're gonna have in the connect these machines to, the operating system customization, applications that you want to run, and load balancers if needed, and you can add them there. And this is more or less talking about the canvas, and we'll see the canvas. I mean, we'll walk through it. So deploy services are always linked to their templates. We mentioned that before. Once you create once you bring that base template into the canvas, it creates a copy of it with a large grid. I mean, you can run a PowerShell, you can see the link between it, but it's basically a copy, and it always is based on a template. And typically, this is good to know, when you're creating the service template, you don't know what host is going to be targeted at that point, because that's on a deployment phase, and you don't know what load balancers are going to be created. So you bring in a load balancer, but behind the scenes during the deployment phase, load balancers are created on demand, on the fly. If you're using Microsoft NLB, it will create the load balancer on the VMs. If you're using any third party such as Netscaler F5, which they have their providers for, they will create the load balancer connectors on these servers during that deployment phase. So it's very hard to it's kind of a little bit of a limitation to know specifically what are your load balancers going to look like prior to deploying. In 2012 RTM, we introduced a concept of called a custom resource, and basically that's a folder that you create in the library share, which you name, you add an extension, a .cr next to it, and inside that folder you will store your scripts, and you will store all the files necessary to run a specific application or script or whatever you want to deploy in the service template. So in the library console, you'll see that it's just a because it's labeled custom resource, and you won't see the contents of it unless you connect to it directly. But it gives you an idea that you can just package everything into one place, like nice and organized, so you know where your things are. The things that you're going to use, the scripts, are always in the same place. And part of the process is that it's going to transfer this CR file, so this CR folder, down to the guest OS at one point. So you want everything that you need in one custom resource, so it doesn't have to go and be transferring files over and over, so it makes the process longer. So that's another advantage of using custom resources. You can use custom resources for web deploys, server at V, agent and sequencer if you're using server at V. I won't go into details of server at V or web deploy packages. It's going to be more of this is more of a generalized concept of service templates. But just to give you an overview, web deploy is basically a package that you create in Visual Studio for a website that you're creating. So once you create in Visual Studio, you save it as a .zip file, and you can save that into the library. Server at V, it's virtualizing server applications, and once you have your sequencer, which is the mechanism to monitor what changes are being done behind the scenes during the setup of the server application, it then packages all that into one environment, one bubble, and it's always available, and you can scale it out and run many instances of it. And the SQL, there's another component, which is a SQL DAC pack, which basically is a SQL database definition. So when you you can create it in Visual Studio, or you can use SQL tools to be able to create a SQL DAC pack from an existing database. And basically, it contains the metadata of the database, the structure, database name, users, tables, and then you can run scripts to populate these tables and put the information that you want in there. You're gonna hear in many forums and many blogs and information in TechNet the generic command execution, and basically this is controlling the behavior. You can run custom scripts to extend the usability of service templates. So if you're not interested in deploying a web application or a server at V, you can always leverage the generic the GCEs or generic command executions to run scripts and to be able to install applications. So you can specify run as account, script restart behavior, login properties, that type of thing. You can also script parameters, and there's GCEs for pre and post to control, so you can run things prior to installing an application. So a little bit of an example is let's use AppV for the server AppV application. It's a good example. So you will for a server AppV, you will create a pre-install of the agent. So if you will have a base VM template that has just the operating system, and then you go ahead and create a pre-install script that will basically install the agent for you. Then you publish your server AppV application, and then once the pre-install script runs, the AppV the server AppV application is installed, and then the service template completes its functionality there. Maybe if you want to, maybe already that you have on your server some weird application that is going to cause you problems. You can probably create a pre-uninstall. So you go ahead and pre-uninstall something, knowing the commandlet, and then go ahead and install a new application. Or you need to install something because it's required by the application, but it's only a one-time thing. You can create a pre and then a post. So you have these controllable actions and phases. So they're very very useful. So there are scripts that are applied to the service template globally, and there are for applications. So own applications could have pre and post install scripts. And a big, huge difference between RTM and SP1 is that in RTM they allowed you just one pre-install, one pre-uninstall, one uh, it's one of each. So in SP1, they basically extended the script to be 99. So now you can have a pre-install script. You can have 90, like up to 99 scripts that run on that pre-install script. So it makes it very powerful. You can basically control the whole flow of an installation by just doing pre-install scripts. So it's a very good addition to the product. SQL profiles, basically you have to, we'll go a little bit in detail here, but basically a SQL profile is that you have to have a VHD, a template, with the image sysprep, the operating system sysprep, but also inside that you need to have SQL sysprep. And there's an option in the SQL installation that will say, if you want to do this in a sysprep image, and basically it's a partial installation of SQL. And what BMM does, is that once you deploy this template, it will go ahead and customize it to the point that it recognizes that the SQL is in there, so it will complete the installation. So you will have an instance, and it will then start the service and create the service, and later on you can install tools and be able to add SQL scripts or SQL databases to it. But that's required to have that sysprep SQL instance in there. And it's a interesting the way that it's done, because not be aware that not everything is supported in that environment. So you'll have it's very limited. You can't sysprep the SQL tools. So if you want the tools to be in there, you probably have to, before you sysprep the operating system, install the tools separately, so you have them already available. But in the process of sysprepping SQL, installing the SQL tools is not an option. It's like a separate installation that you have to do. So SQL, they have specialization during provisioning, so you can allow to change the instance name, the security mode if you want Windows authentication or SQL authentication, the protocol that you want, if you want TCP, if you want name pipes, what's the password of the account. You also, if you can have a configuration file, you can import this configuration file. We'll bring this into the environment. It will configure this for you. Also, the services identities for the SQL agent, and I believe for the SQL service, the agent, and the browsing, you can control that as well. You can specify run as accounts for those. So it gives you a bit of flexibility of how you do your installations for SQL. So application host, basically you can deploy to, you deploy virtual machines to physical servers or single host or clusters. Basically it creates a record, a link in the tables in VMM that know what an application is and what VMs are tied into it. And the same thing with the SQL, with all the applications. It's basically tables in the VMM database that are pointers to VMs and profiles and definitions and files that you are using for these deployments. And that's how they kind of link everything together. Yes, once you're doing the deployment, you can either target clouds or target a specific host. You can create variables too that you can specify for the names of VMs, and it'll allow you to do that during deployment phase. This is done by using variables, and this is very important and kind of I say this is a key takeaway from this setting here, because this is very useful. Once you do you want, say for example, you want your SQL Server to have, you want to require the SQL Server name, so you can kind of bind it to a variable name. So you use the at, any name at. So if you want to prompt for the user and say, I want my local admin, so you wrap it around with the add commands in local admin. It will basically, when you're in the deployment phase, it will basically force you to it will show you have to specify a local admin, or a domain name, or something, or whatever you need for your. It could be for a script. You have you have a custom script. You're expecting a variable, so you go ahead and wrap it around and prompt for that value that is going to be used in that script. The nice thing about this is also that it stores that information in VMM, the database. So basically it uses the same variable, whatever name you provided, all over the script. So you ask for it once and it's used many times during your service deployment. So you don't have to have the user deploy it every time. You can do mandatory, you can encrypt the data, you can add default values to it if you want to kind of make it easier on your users. And at the bottom, you'll see some examples. Add computer name will ask for a computer name. VM ID could ask for the ID of the VM. I mean, it's the sky's the limit on what you need to require to prompt for. We talked about the canvas. I mentioned the canvas, and it's basically called the service designer, service template designer, and this is what it more or less looks like. So this is a screenshot of kind of the canvas, and you can see the mid tiers, the web tiers, and you can see how they are broken down in networks. And this is a screenshot that was provided by one of the product team's presentation, which I used here to illustrate this. And you can see how you can accommodate for how you want your basically your service to look at. Also, you can control things like the order in which these are going to be deployed. So if you need kind of your SQL Server has to be first, you can control the order, being the SQL installation first, the web tier second, or the mid tier second, and the web tier last. You can control that order. So it's very, very useful, but it's very simple to use. And as you can see, it's collapsed in the corner, but you can see a VM templates being kind of hidden there. You can expand that to be shown. So you have the ribbon, the designer canvas, and the properties at the bottom. So more or less everything looks that way. So single tier services, you see how you have all your roles and OS roles and features, hardware configuration, OS. You go ahead and deploy it to a service instance. It creates a VM and it passes all the applications and the operating system and all your requirements. Then you can have you have a service instance and these many machines in there. And they can be an exact replica of each other, or you can have different roles. So let me just, this is more or less the flow. Due to time constraints, I'm just going to go ahead and present the whole flow here. So I'll just present this kind of a Visio drawing here. So you see how you have service templates, which component of your settings. You have an application profile, which will have your DAG pack or your web deploy depending on what you need. You have your computer, your VM template that you use, the hardware profiles, guest OS profiles. So you can see here how everything kind of plays together. The guest OS will have your roles and features. You can apply these SQL profiles and do a deployment. Or application, and if you're running an application, you can do your pre and post GCEs to install or uninstall applications depending on what your need is. So customizing the deployment, prepare the template for deployment. You have to kind of specify OS settings like computer name, admin password. So you can use for computer names, you can use the pound sign to add numbers. So you can basically prefix your names and then use pound sign to kind of increase the number of the machine. Um, SQL connection strings, if needed, you can also do that on the deployment of a SQL DAC pack. You can use these templates in different environments. So you have development, staging, and production. So basically, you can export these templates or copy these templates and modify them based on your stage or what you want to do. So in development environment, if you have the UAT user, you have a development service template, you create the VMs there, and then that's good. You can pass it to your testing or quality, then you UAT, and then finally in production. This is once you create your environment, you can deploy it to the cloud, and you can see how you have a cloud structure. This also doesn't necessarily require to be a cloud. It could be a host group. So depending on what you select during the deployment, if it's a cloud or host group, you'll see different scenarios. But here you can see how the settings overrides. You see, this is what we were talking about, the variables that we were asking. So if the ones you see here were just created on the template to prompt for a value. If you wanted these to be mandatory, you'll need to change it in the template. But if they were to be mandatory, a red X will show in each corner, indicating that you need a value for this, and blank is not a valid character, so it will prompt you for that. So this is just the designer view. And deploy service will just initiate the actions to create a VM and copy all the necessary files over and initiate that service for you and create the entries in the database. This is another screen that I'm going to kind of, this is during the deployment. You select a tier deployment order. It creates a new VM from the template. It powers it on, so it gives you the flow. It installs the VMM guest agent with the local administrator account. Then it does the add of the domain, that type of thing from the OS perspective. Then you have the application level pre-install GCEs. It will install that. It will install the application, and then anything post that. And if you had a load balancer, it will do that at the end, and you're done. And this is how it will look more or less in the VMM console. So you have the service listed. So you see how there's one service, and then you see your tiers, and underneath their tiers you see the corresponding VM that has it. That's the guest VM that's hosted, and then you see the applications that it's basically using. If it's one of the three that are supported, right? The web deploy, the server app V, or the SQL profile. So you can see them in that sense. If you did the scripts, you'll see the tiers created. You will not see the application. That's the only difference if you happen to go to the route that you're using just scripts to install your application. So you can see your settings at the bottom. So that's very convenient when you click on. So you can, if this little orange square represents the server app V, so they have had highlighted, and you can see how the options at the bottom, the information that it provides, where it's connecting. So you don't have to go and open your service template every time to see these properties. You can just see them right off the console directly once they're deployed. Interesting also, in the ribbon, you can see that services is highlighted. By default, you'll see VMs being highlighted. So bear that in mind. If you want to see the services, you need to click that button first to be able to see the structure, this hierarchy. It's a bit, people get a bit confused when they try to look back into it. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of pause this for a second here, and I am going to present my remote desktop session. So we can go ahead and create one. So I'll just put it in front here. So what you're seeing is a VM. Ignore my background applications there, my icons, is I'm just running this under a domain controller. So I'm RDPing into a domain controller and basically running a remote connection to my VMM server. So this is SP1, and I'm selecting the library server, and you get the service templates. But before I go there, I just want to kind of go through the different profiles because we mentioned these. So here's the application profile. So these are the little building blocks that I mentioned prior, for your that you can assign to your users to be able to use and create their own VM templates that they then can use in your service templates. So you see how the structure, how you want, how useful can these be to create your own templates. And when I mention this, think about your if you have an architecture where you have cloud users, where you these users say, I don't know, quality, or your development team, your quality team, and your user acceptance team. So the development team needs to create your own VMs, so you can have profiles assigned to them that they can use and build upon. So this is what the application profiles be. Um, uh, Capability profiles is just basically what properties of the hypervisor you want to use. So I'll skip that because that's not completely related to service templates. Although it is a property that is used in the hardware profile. The guest OS is basically the customization and with of the OS, so what things you want the OS to have. So let's look at the properties of one here. And you can see that in guest OS profile you have your operating system, your admin password. And you can see how I request the local administrator passwords to run as. So basically that will put a kind of a little 3 dots there so they can select the run as account. I can select roles and features. I can also put some variables here for the domain and for the run as account that will join that machine to the domain. And you can also specify answer files as well. But this is basically the OS profile, and here's where you can access the grant access to your users. Hardware profile, you can see it's the same exact property. You'll have your hardware profile, which basically defines the hardware, memory, NIC, etc., as you will do, and the same thing happens when you do the access. You grant access to your users. Interesting enough, let me just create a SQL profile here. So just name it anything, and you can see how you can control the instance name. You can control the instance ID. You can provide a product, a run as account. In the configuration, you can specify the media source that. And in SQL you require media, so it can be a folder within the VM that has the SQL disk, or you can, during the process, you can attach an ISO. In the template you can have an ISO attached, and it will transfer that ISO over and then use that media. So you can, in media source, you can specify a D drive, an E drive, or a path within the local VM. You can add your administrators. Here's where you can select your authentication. You can use a run as account for your SA if you're using SA. Here's where you can select your TCP or name pipes. And the configuration file, if you have a config file that was built from a installation of SQL, you can go ahead and browse it from the library and import it, and it will populate these items for you except the media source. And finally, here's the kind of the accounts that you can use for SQL. So you can see the SQL Server service, the agent, and the reporting services. So you can browse and select your run as account as you wish from your list. And once it starts configuring SQL, it will use these accounts to start the services. So I already have a VM. I have several VM templates in my environment. And with SP1, you can also use Linux-based VM templates. So that's a good good thing too that you can now extend your outside of the Windows operating system. You can use Linux-based VMs. So let's go ahead and just create one service here. So you can see how I created just when you create it, it asks you for many tiers. I usually select blank. If you select one of the others, if you select one of the other tiers, you will notice that it has a square in the middle here that you can just drag and drop a template on top of it, and it will reconfigure itself. So it's no big deal. So I'm not gonna deploy this, but I'm just gonna walk you through the process. So here, you can see how I drag and drop, and due to my small space here, I apologize for that. But you can see how you can click on this and your properties down at the bottom change. So you can change the name of the template. You can add a description. You can add an owner. You release, and release is very important because release is going to be used when you're doing updates. So if you want to update a service template, you use your release. So this is in alphanumeric. You can type in new, you can type in 1, you can type in 1.0. It really doesn't matter what you type in there. It's just use it as an indicator. Once you have it in here, this is what I was talking about. This is a copy of this template. Then it's not actually the template itself that came in here. So the settings were copied over, and now this new template is tied into the service template once I save it. But what I did now was just right-click properties, and you can see how you can go through the different variations, the different options. And if you have, since I already had this created, I linked a hardware configuration, and I can specify my networks, my VM networks. Since this is SP1, it's VM networks. If it was a RTM, it will be a logical network. My configuration for the OS, my application configuration. So I can select here from a list, let's say SQL DAC pack, SQL app deploy. So I can have a DAC pack associated with this. So I can actually have a SQL configuration, and I can select, okay, this is my database, this is my DAC pack, my definition. I go ahead and then create a SQL script that will populate that. So this is a small database that has just a list of planets. So once I create the database, I can populate the tables that I want. Then, since this is a DAC pack, I will have to select the SQL Server configuration. So I can just select new, and I can configure my my SQL. Just again, remember that this requires, if you're going to do SQL, it requires the VHD that you're using in the template to have SQL sysprep. That's very important, because otherwise it will fail the installation because it can't find the instance that it's looking for. Then you have custom properties and application configuration. Sorry, let me just go back, and here you can see how you can add more web apps and scripts. So I can do some validation here and say, okay, I want to pre-install, and you see how up to 99 that I can build. I can specify, cmd.exe and run whatever parameter I want, /q/c, some other, like a batch file, right? And if I have that batch file in a custom resource, I can select that custom resource from my list and run as account that it's going to run under. And you can change, like if you want the script to log to specific component, or log what it's doing, you can redirect it to a valid folder, and it will log that for you. Very useful for troubleshooting. Also, you can do some customization here. If it's an exit code that matches any other value than 0, just fail the task, or ignore it, warn and continue. So you can specify more in detail what you want to do here. Kind of control. Very important here too. Let's assume we add another virtual application here. You can see the order in which this is listed. It's the order that it gets installed. So if I had SQL first and then virtual application, SQL will be installed first and then virtual application second. And if I had another virtual application third, that will be executed after that. Another thing, and very important thing to note is that this script here that you have down here only applies for the first time that you deploy the service. So this scripts that you define here do not apply during an update. You can also add scripts to the application. So if I wanted to run a script against this virtual application, I can do that. And these scripts do apply every time you do an update. So you can do a pre-install and say I want to back up the state of an application. So I can back up the state here. I can then installs, and then I can do a post-install and restore the state back into the environment, and that will give me the redundancy I need. So every time I update this application, say I have a new version, those scripts will run. So that's important to note, because if you run them on your environment, you notice that you don't have that. You don't. They won't run and kind of get frustrated because why does it run? Well, there's a rule to the scripts. So just remember, these only on the first time, these application scripts run every time you update. So let's just make an assumption that let me go ahead and kind of change some properties here. Let me just give it a. I forgot to give it a VM network here, so let me just go ahead. I just wanted to pass validation. So I want to select that internal uplink and say OK. So now I have my network over here with my tier called base. I didn't change the name of it. So here you can see, let me just right click property so it's a bit more visible. So this is one of my tiers. So I can change the name here. You see how it says my tier in tier 1. But note that there's a few options here, and these are the kind of the order controls that we have available for you. So you can prevent this machine from being automatically migrated. You can you have a preferred deployment order. So this is where, let's assume that this was the SQL server. I can select this one to be first, and then my other tier can be second. So the SQL will be first. It will install the VM, but it won't do anything to it until the SQL tier is created, and then it will jump to the second one. And the same thing with the servicing order. So you can control what order within the service, what's applied first and what's applied second. That's in the case that everything is updated. You can create many instances of an application. So if you want, in your deployment, you want to deploy 3 machines at the same time, you can go ahead, or you can increase this to 2, and that's what's going to happen is it's going to create 2 machines at the same time during deployment phase. So that helps you. That kind of increases the speed for the service deployments. Maximum instant count is the maximum that you can have for this particular tier, but the thing here is that this doesn't block you in any way. So if you're kind of doing scale outs and you add more resources, if you hit your maximum instance count, what's going to happen is that you're going to be warned, but you're never blocked to kind of create machines. So you can just put an arbitrary number there, and if you go over it, you're being warned every time, but there's no problem. And upgrade domains is basically if you have a group of machines. So let's say we have 2 machines here, and this becomes my my upgrade domain. So within this upgrade domain, we will have services, instance and services that it can be applied. So a domain is kind of a group of machines, and then within that group you have a servicing order. Think of it that way. Not to be confused with the Windows with an Active Directory domain. It has nothing to do with that. It's just it's kind of specifying a group of machines. Okay. And a create availability set is a new feature that came into SP1. Basically, if you don't want all your VMs to be hosted in one particular host. So when you create an availability set within VMM, it creates a tag, and it basically means that if I have more than one machine, more than one VM, I'm going to place this in two different hosts. So my not all my hosts are in a same not all my VMs are in the same host, and maybe it crashes my whole application. So you can create availability sets for that. So that's controlling the order, the NICs. If you wanted to add a load balancer, you can just go ahead and create a load balancer. Bear in mind that you will require, if you use the Microsoft NLB, it comes out of the box. You need to enable MAC spoofing in the network, and also tie in the links between the VM networks. So you have a nice other feature in the designer here, which is the save and validate. So you can click on save and validate, and basically it has a list built-in validation that it does against the properties that you select in the VM. So it will validate and make sure that you don't everything is okay. And if it had any warnings or errors, it will pop down here in the bottom, and you can just click on it and see what's going on and make corrections based on that. So then you can go ahead and configure deployment. And configure deployment is where you select either you want a cloud or you want all hosts. So you can select here what you want. I'm just going to select all host. I'll call it, and this is the name as is going to show in the service. So this name has to be kind of, you should use a name that's representative of what you're deploying. So I can just say IS server for my app, for an example. So you can click OK. And here it says no suitable host, so I'll go ahead and refresh again, and it will go and perform the placement algorithm. And okay, it found that this Alvin M7 server host is suitable for this VM. So by default, if you don't specify any prefix on the name, it will default to service VM and whatever number. If you wanted to change the host, you can just select host down here, and it will go through the algorithm again. Very useful if it doesn't find a host for some reason or fails, and you don't know why. You can select host, and it will give you the window where it's doing the placement. So when you do that, you can see the rating explanation, and it can tell you why it's not a suitable host, or why it couldn't find a suitable host, and you can make corrections and then come back and fix them. So if you here, if you see this is a server component, if I had any variables, they will show here in the settings, and I can just populate them here, like we showed in the presentation. And basically, based on that, we can add the required field, and then once we're ready, we can just click on deploy service, and go ahead and kind of initiate this and run it out. If for some reason I decide, okay, you know what, I'm not going to do this right now because I have a maintenance window and I need to do this off hours, once you create this and select the corresponding host and specify your variables, you can just click on this box here, and it will ask you if you want to save it or not. Let's go ahead and save it. And if you go to service deployment configuration, you can see that you can then go ahead and go back to configure deployment. And you see how it brings everything back as I configured it, and then you can deploy it. So it's a nice way of kind of pre-staging everything that you want to do, and then at the one point in time, go ahead and deploy it. Very, very useful. Okay. So I think I covered most of what I wanted to do there. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Sorry. I have that open here. So let me just have plenty of windows open. Yes, I want Link to show this. So a few things, changes in SP1, it's that the ingest agent requires .NET 4, and this is taken care of by the agent installation, or it can be sysprep in your template If you want to use server core, it requires a Windows Server doesn't need R2 SP1 or above if you want your VMs to use server core. You can be deployed via ISO. In all services instances have a guest agent installed. You can do that as well. You can have servers that are untrusted domains or workgroups. And in RTM, we didn't allow that. In RTM, we forced you to use you always had to specify a domain. Now that that's not the case. And you can even have Linux support. And you can have also disconnect the VMs. Payload transfers in SP1, we use bits as any other component. You can use ISOs for VMs that without connectivity to install what you required. If you have VM networks that are isolated, you will need to go to the library and specify the networks that are in the library server, the networks that it can transfer to, so it allows you to transfer. So otherwise, it will fail the installation as well. I'm going to go ahead and skip that demo, and what I'm going to do is present here very quickly how a service update is updated. And I'm sorry about this, but I'm trying to do this in interest of time. So basically, once you have a service deployment, a service that is already deployed, if you increase the version, the release, and you make changes to it, to the application, then you apply that update. It goes ahead and updates the machines to the new or the application. So if you have existing machines, it will update the version within it. It will then go ahead and apply the changes, and the instance is ready if you just do an application. It's very quickly. And it will monitor if it has any deployment windows, and then it will update that. So it's very simple to do. You can do in-place updates, which is basically changing some particular OS property, or the application itself, or you can do image-based, which is replacing the old OS image and just installing new ones. So that's two ways of doing this. And this chart here basically shows you what how the order is. So you select a tier in servicing order. Based on servicing order, select based on upgrade domains, and then it removes the load balancer if it has it. Go ahead and applies the application pre-service, makes any applications changes, does the post. If you have any uninstall or any other application script, it will run those, and then you have your application updated, and then it adds the load balancer after that. And you're done. If you were to select a image-based updating, it's basically the same. It selects the order that you want based on the upgrade domain, removes the load balancer, it adds the machine, so it transfers VHD over and creates a new machine, and then it goes to the application level store, GCE, so it runs the basic the global scripts, runs any app-v in this case if you're using server app-v. It does all the OS customization, and then runs the application customization, and restores the state, and then add the load balancer, and you're done. So it's kind of a preference of what you want to do, how you want to deploy these. Let's go ahead quickly. I am going to just show you now show you here my session. So let's just close this here we were looking for. If I go to VMs and services, this is the services section, so you can see this is what we were talking before. So we can go to kind of app-v. This was let me just use one that's healthy. So you can see here that this one doesn't have VMs, because now with SP1 you can deploy server DAG packs to existing SQL servers. So this is what this service is doing. So you see how there's no VMs under the tier. SCAC, this is a app controller server. This kind of failed. Let me just go down here. Okay, so this is a good one. You can see I have VB5. So this is I have an AppV server tier called AppV server, and inside I can see my VM, and the same thing with the SQL tier. So you have that information there, and this is what it's talking about in the previous slide. That you can do, this is the actions that you can perform on the globally on the service, and then you can do scale out. And scale out, you can see how you can select a tier. So if I wanted to scale out my AppV server, I can just click next. I can just type in the name of the virtual machine. So if I needed to add one, it looks for the suitable host that I can find that can host that guy. Let me just select the first one. I'm not going to commit this at the end. I'm just going through the wizard. Configuration settings. You can see how you can change the uplink, change the networking, that type of thing. You can select what to do with the machines. Say don't turn list the property of the VM itself. And then when you click next, the summary, and then you can either scale out, and it will create a new VM based on the original settings that you had for this service and for this particular tier. You can also, if you are going to do you have a new version of the application, you can set template, and set template will basically modify settings for the service or replace the current template with an updated template for the service. So you can just modify previous settings. So this is my information, or you can just replace it and you specify the required template updated. So you see how I have a newer one. I can apply that. Say, okay, let's go ahead and do that. I have some settings. So it looks at the settings and allows me to change that if I need it to. And then it says, okay, I want to apply updates to existing virtual machines in place or deploy a new one. So you can choose if you want to deploy a new one, and that will replace the VM, or just go ahead and remove the application and install the new version that you required per tier. So then it does a last up. It does an update review, and if you click on update, it will work on so it gives you some warnings if it had any conflicts or any situations. If you have a service maintenance, it will validate that service maintenance after deployment, and will deploy based on that maintenance. Otherwise, you can just click on this button checkbox at the bottom. It says apply immediately, and it will go ahead and apply that immediately after you click finish on the summary. So this is more or less how you apply updates to your services. So it's kind of useful, very useful to change and be able to scale out and do those properties. So like we saw that we can start, stop, shut down, delete. We can do scale out. We can do tier functionality, which is apply templates. VM level actions, you can just migrate VMs over, store my VMs and machines, deploy VMs from library, clone VMs, scale it, create checkpoints, and scale in. Bear in mind that scale in, it's not an option in the console. It's called scale in. Basically, scale in means that if you did a scale out on a service template, so you added a VM, right? So back to the example where you had a second IIS server that you scaled out, an IIS tier, a web tier, you added a second machine, and then now you notice that that we migrated the users out. The 50 users that we had now are not using that, so we can just collapse this VM and just use one VM again, one server again. So you go ahead and delete that second VM, and that's the concept of scale in. So it's just removing VMs from a tier. And I already kind of demoed all the process, so I'll skip that. And in our summary, you can see how understanding the benefits of a service VMM. So you can see that the versatility that you have creating a VM just for a single VM, even for a single VM, you can add roles and features. Those are very useful things that you didn't have to do before. You can leverage the scripts to install whatever component you want. So that's great great tool to be used in your environment. The life cycle. So you create a template, you deploy the application, um, you customize it, you deploy it, and you update it if needed for your needs and for your applications. Easy to deploy services in the private cloud or host groups. As you saw when we were doing the deployment, I could have chosen a cloud or a host group. You can do repeatable updates in the service, either by increasing by applying the changes on existing VMs or creating new VMs. And some investments that were done in the SP1, which is the 4.0 .NET 4.0 and the agent requirement, and .NET 4.0 agent requirement, and also the things that you can use with non-requirements for domains, and the library property that you can add your VM networks. So those are kind of new investments that were done in service templates in SP1. This concludes this video, and appreciate your time, appreciate you listening. So